Welcome to the Girls Tape podcast. I'm your host, Tariro Gurure, and today I have a remarkable, amazing woman in this arts journey, academia journey, but I call her an archiver. Her name is Joyce Jenje Makwenda. So I've heard your story. I am at a documentary launch that is the history of women in politics in Zimbabwe. It's been a long time coming, and welcome to the Girls Table. Please just tell me briefly about your journey.
Or it's the history of women politicians in Zimbabwe. Yes, it's the history of women politicians of Zimbabwe. Actually, I was just saying to our facilitator that I became what I am because a historian. I loved history when I was growing up. I loved music. Everything really started with music for me. But I was very lucky. I came from a family of storytellers, like my 6 parents. I called my 2 grandparents from my father's side, my 2 grandparents from my mother's side, and my mother and father. But there was one parent who didn't relate stories, my grandmother on my father's side. She was a very busy person. Not that this way busy, but she was super busy. But then I think that showed me that if you don't know where you're coming from, you don't know where you're going. And it all started with music. I loved music when I was growing up, and my parents sometimes would compare their music with mine. And we there was that we listened when our parents were like what they went through and all that. But then when I started doing research because of the stories that they were telling me on music, because I am a very musical person myself, and I managed to have a musical child. I think if you watch to send another child, Okalayo, it's my 3rd child.
Oh,
yes. Interesting.
So I understand she's in Norway.
No, in the UK.
Ah, beautiful.
So when I went to interview those people, they started talking about politics. I'm a musician, they started talking about this woman, OYNJ. They started talking about education. They started talking, and then I realized music is the umbrella of the society. It's not just music as we see it. That's why I'm now also an ethnomusicologist. So I then started following all that as well, but the backbone of this archive is music. I did the documentary on Ikangela, Zimbabwe Township music. I wrote a book on Zimbabwe Township music. I've written a book on women musicians from 1930s to today. Zimbabwe Township music again from the 30s to today. So then I realized whatever fast, women are not. Actually, I realized it more when I went to do my master's at FIT. There was no literature on women. Mm-hmm. Not much, like you could really scratch. And I said I need to really make sure I interview as many women as I can. Mm-hmm. Like right now, I've interviewed more than 500 women in different genres, in music, in different categories, in music, in politics, in film, in theater, in journalism. My mother was the 2nd print journalist here in Zimbabwe. So when I was having problems getting some of the musicians, she told me, go to the National Archives. We used to write these stories. I said, are you sure? And it became like my home. So I have interviewed quite a number of journalists from the time of my mother. And so I have what I call women's histories.
Women's history.
Yes, women's histories. Which covers everything.
But I want us to talk about the history of women politicians in Zimbabwe.
Yes, then I interviewed about almost 80 women on and then I followed up from all those interviewed people who have done their research on Los K. Actually, Los K, I came to know of Los K when I was invited at Oxford University to talk about my work through the Zimbabwe British Society. And I heard about this powerful woman. And I said, when I came, I was angry. to, because my mother comes from Bulawayo, my father comes from Mara, and I went to my relatives, Mama, and I said, why were you not telling me of this woman? Then I realized we are going to tell our stories as women. So I went back to even time immemorial to understand prehistoric women politicians, and wow, I've unearthed a lot, and from pre-colonial to today. So yeah, that's how.
I wanted to talk. This was an election year, and women. There's been a decrease of women in parliament compared to 2018, and we are going into by-elections soon. There's just 4 women against over 27 women, and men actually. But I'm worried with. I've seen powerful women in your documentary that we watched earlier, and them being powerful. Why is there a decrease in women participation?
I think the problem, what they said in that documentary, is the problems that we are facing, today, which we need to address as women. We need to address all those women, all those problems as women. We need to make sure that we address all those issues, like how when we opened this, my opening remarks were that women must desist from trivial issues. They must go for real issues. I think as women we don't look at the goal. We look at trivial issues like she did this to me or what. Men, they fight, and tomorrow they put that person that they were fighting in politics. But I think as women we don't. We need to.
You're talking of a pertinent issue here that women find themselves making things that don't matter important. But for men, sometimes when they know the goal, they might fight, but the ultimate goal is being in parliament or being in council, being in senate. They know how to fight for the same goal. So this is for women and how they can fight for the same goal. That's one thing that I'm taking. But from this documentary launch, I hope that people are able to view it online as soon as it is launched online. The power of documenting. This is my key takeaway, where the story of Los K, the story of Mbuyane Handa, the story of Mama Mafuyane, the story of Ruth Chinamano, the story of wives to Leopold Takawira, to the Chitepos, the power that they had as individuals, as politicians. At one point, I don't remember the name of that woman who said we would carry Bibles and pretend that we are having a spiritual gathering while we were preaching politics. So these were tactics, strategies that were being used by women. And someone said that we often had a sort of a kindergarten where we would say nursing mothers come with your babies, and you'd know that there would be more than 20 or 25 of those women, but would then talk about politics, and then would know that they'll spread the same gospel to the next person. So these were strategies, tactics that were being used by women. But I saw the generation from Obolos K, the generation in the 60s. I know of one white woman who was in parliament in the 60s. The only white woman actually in parliament who was opposing Ian Smith. I didn't know that there was an opposition in Rhodesia at that time. And one woman who was raising funds for kids to go and study at school, because she would ask pertinent questions like, you are having these kids in the backyard with their mothers and you are not taking them to school. Why? That was one way of activism. The change ways, the Omamu Jane Gwenya, and also we are here in a space where we are also fighting the idea of a generation where we need to pass on the political ability, participation. But one issue that I realized in this documentary was that young people were not represented, not young people I say, but modern day politicians but if they were to watch this documentary, they would learn that the things that they are going through, they are not new. Fighting patriarchy is not new. The problems that they are facing, being name called, being said that you have loose moral because you are a women in politics, is not new. I saw Margaret Dongo speaking about how people went to her husband and said that your wife is a prostitute, your wife is like this, your wife is busy sleeping with young boys, but the husband was supportive and said, you know what, go and I'm taking you to court actually, because you are harassing me, you are harassing my marriage, you are making me not have a peace of mind by your lies. If you ever catch her, please bring her as you have caught her, not just lie because you want to lie. So the name calling hasn't stopped. We've seen how women are being called, even online, being name called and say that you can't participate because you're not married. What will you teach our kids? You're not going to participate because you've had a relationship with Ningi and Ningi. You're not going to participate because you've done this or these other things. But men are at the forefront of these things, of doing all these immoral things, but you never hear them being name called or being said you can't participate because you've married 11 times or you have 11 kids, you're not married. But it's always women at the receiving end. So these are the problems that women faced before, and they are still facing them now. I think that is the key point, where to say, even if you're name called, even if you're told that you're not worth it, just go and try and be there, be visible, and make sure that you participate. It's so sad that the numbers are still low, and they've even gone lower compared to 2018. But I hope that as we go forward, we see this interpretation, we see this documentation of saying women are going to do it, women will do it, and women are actually good leaders. Thank you so much for tuning into the Girls Table podcast, and I hope that you follow us on our YouTube pages and our Facebook and our Twitter so that you get notifications of more of this podcast. Thank you so much.